Hello, Misfits. This is Kate.
And this is Kevin.
Welcome to Horrorwood.
I almost said this be Kevin.
This be Kevin. Which it would still,
it still works.
It is you.
But I don't want to upset the balance.
I see. Mm-hmm. Oh man, my stomach hurts so bad. I ate way too much. Yikes. I don't think I told you about Melissa Villaseñor, like how that went.
No, you told me you were going to see her,
right.
Then you texted me a picture.
Oh, yeah.
With her. With nothing else.
Yeah, just
and I
there
was
we
like,
were.
I love it.
She was amazing. The thing that was like such a standout with her was she did 2 shows that day.
Whoa.
So we were the late show. After the first show, she came out into the lobby. So there's people like all lined up for the merch. And then there's our line waiting to go in. Mm-hmm. And she went through the merch line and took a picture with every single person that wanted one.
Aww.
And then she did the next show. Mm-hmm. So super fun. And she had 2 opening acts. I got another picture so the second opening act was Marcela Aguelo, who has an HBO special called Bitch Grow Up.
I haven't seen it, but I've seen that pop up.
Okay. And she just moved to Chicago and she performs monthly here now. So funny. So good.
Yes.
So I got a picture with her as well because she was also just like hanging out by the merch table.
Yeah.
The show, their sets were fantastic, as well as the opener. Then after the show, Matt was like, I don't really feel like I need to like stand and get a picture, but I wanted to get something like of merch because she does a lot of art. And so she had like a lot of prints and stickers and stuff. So I'm like, well, I do want to get something and I'd like to get a picture if she's going to do that after the late show. Sure enough, she comes out after the show, takes a picture with every single person. And you just don't see that a lot with celebrities.
You don't. You really don't. And it's so nice when they do it because they don't have to.
Of course not. And she had 2 shows. I was so impressed by that.
Mm-hmm.
I already liked her before, but it just like upped the respect factor. So they didn't have a print of the one that I wanted, but she had it as a sticker. And it's a girl on stage. And there's this huge spaceship above her beaming down. And the girl saying, "Such good lighting."
I love that.
It's
That's
so cute.
Funny.
It's so cute.
That's amazing. It sounds like you had a great time.
It was so fun. I love the Den.
The Den is a cool space.
It is a cool space.
I really like it there.
Yeah. How was your weekend?
My weekend was full of pride. Sunday was the Pride Parade.
Yeah.
And I had to get up at 7, which for me is really early. Sorry, people who are listening who get up way earlier, including Kate. But I had to like do a whole bunch of stuff. I had to like drive down to the end of the parade route, park my car, take an Uber back up into Lakeview, go to the storage unit, pick up the shirts and the speakers, walk them to the float. But luckily I had a bunch of volunteers who showed up who didn't say they were going to show up.
Oh, nice. That's a nice surprise.
So I didn't really have to carry anything. And then I was pulling up the people who were like, I'm about to pass out. Because it was like in the high 90s.
So hot, yeah.
And you could feel it.
Oof.
Like
it was rough. That was a rough temperature day.
It was really rough, but it was really fun. It was really good. Everything went really great. I hope everyone had a great Pride. I hope you were celebrating and had fun.
Yeah, and this is coming out just after the 4th of July weekend. So if you did get together with family or friends, whatever, we just hope that you were safe had a good time.
Yes. Yeah, and carol them fireworks, y'all. Blow your fingers off.
Kevin's going through some things right now.
I'm feeling a lot of feelings at once, and it's overwhelming.
Well, this might also be overwhelming because there's a lot in this episode. So let's get right to it.
Okay.
When we left off in part 1, Haing had finally gotten a flight out of Thailand bound for the U.S. Even his departure was difficult. Like there were several hang-ups, but he did finally get to the United States. The only thing was the government had assigned him to Ohio, but his niece and cousin had been placed in Los Angeles. So that was the thing. The government would tell you where you could live in the U.S.
Oh, wow.
And they wanted to try to disperse people throughout. Mm-hmm. But Haing had vowed to take care of his niece because both her parents were killed under the Khmer Rouge.
Yeah.
So he wanted to be wherever she was. A lot of Cambodians were sent to either Long Beach, which is about 25 miles south of Los Angeles, or Chinatown, which is in LA. And so his niece, along with another cousin of Haing's, were in Chinatown.
Okay.
Haing was like, I can't stay in Ohio. I need to be with my niece. He had a few $100s that he had earned working as a doctor in that refugee camp.
That's right.
In Thailand. Yeah.
Okay.
So he used a good chunk of that to buy a plane ticket to Los Angeles. He was like, I'm not staying here. I got to go.
Yeah, they popped you in Ohio, and he's like,
He was able to connect with his cousin, but unfortunately, there wasn't enough room for Haing to live with him in his apartment because they were already over capacity. Mm-hmm. But his cousin did help him find a small studio apartment in the same building, and Nim, his niece, moved in with him. Eventually, they did move into a slightly larger unit in the same building where they could each have a bedroom. Starting out, though, it was like pretty small. Now, obviously, Haing would have loved to have returned to his previous profession as a doctor. Mm-hmm. But he knew in order to do so, he would have to pass an English language proficiency test. And he figured there would be refresher courses he would have to take before he could practice. And he was willing to do all that and go through medical school again. But he needed a job in the meantime to live on and to support Nim.
100%. Did he have any proficiency in English before moving to the U.S.?
I don't know that we would call it a proficiency. He could speak some English.
Okay.
He was that interpreter for John Crowley back in Thailand.
That's right.
So he knew a little bit of English, but not enough to pass a U.S. exam. Standard test.
Sure,
yeah.
I get that. God, even English speakers have trouble with those.
And he knew he couldn't do medical school in the U.S. and have time for a separate job. Right. So he opted to get a job working evenings as a security guard while taking ESL classes during the day.
Ah, there we go. That's smart.
Yes. I came back and I was like, yes. So intense. He knew he wanted a better job, though. And soon he was hired as a caseworker for the Chinatown Service Center. It was a job placement service for refugees. So his job was more than just like placing them into positions. He would act as translator between his clients and their landlords. He would help fill out welfare applications. He helped enroll kids in school. He explained utility bills to his clients. Like, he was kind of a lifeline for a lot of people in the area who, didn't have as good of English skills as he did at that point. Mm-hmm. He eventually bought a car and used it to drive refugees to their medical appointments or to job interviews. He said, quote, being a caseworker was satisfying. It didn't have the status or the money of being a doctor, but it allowed me to help refugees, which is what I wanted. I need water. Sorry, my food's like all moving down.
Kate, I'm so sorry. Oh. I forgot my water jug. I just realized.
I was going to say, it does look different over there.
Normally there's just a jug covering half my face.
Do you want a glass of water?
After this episode.
All right. Through his work, he got to know a lot of other Cambodians in the area. Plus, he knew others from having met them in the refugee camps. Like, one of the women in his neighborhood had been a patient of his in Thailand. Like,
that's insane.
Yeah, isn't that? But it also tells you, like, kind of how close-knit these communities were, because once they found each other in the U.S., they just kind of flocked together.
Well, that makes sense. And also, I can't imagine, like, you've gone through this horrendous drama together.
Yeah.
And you came out on the other side. Like, I can't imagine what kind of bond that forms between people.
Yeah. One day in March of 1982, while working at the center, a couple of friends of his stopped by and said, hey, Hollywood is making a film about Cambodia and we're all applying to be in it. You got to do it. And Haing said, no thanks. He was more concerned with helping his clients. He was like, that's a fantasy. This is real life. These are people with real problems.
Yeah.
But among the Cambodian population in Chinatown and Long Beach, word got around quickly about this movie. And a lot of people applied. Thousands applied.
Cool.
They were hoping to make good money because they came to the country with nothing. But Haing wasn't interested, and he put it out of his head. Then some Cambodian friends of his invited him to a wedding reception. He didn't want to go because it was going to be an hour and a half in traffic, because you know that LA traffic. It was going to cost gas money. It was raining. But he knew a lot of friends that were going to be there. So he's like, ugh, okay, I'll go. When he arrived, he said most of the people were Cambodian, with one exception. He said there was this Black American woman there.
Oh, hey.
This Black American woman was Pat Golden, the casting director for the film The Killing Fields.
Oh, wow.
The Killing Fields was a movie. Sorry. I'm kind of a mess tonight. I'm just like trying to pull it all together.
You're fine, Kate. You're doing great.
My tummy hurts.
What's that? I keep hearing that TikTok sound. I think it's from one of the Kardashians, but it's like, you're doing great, sweetie.
You're doing great, sweetie. Okay. The Killing Fields was a movie directed by Roland Joffe and starred Sam Waterston, John Malkovich, and Julian Sands. It was about the relationship between Sidney Schamberg, a journalist for the New York Times, and Dith Pran, a Cambodian photojournalist. These were real people. It's a true story.
Wow.
It's about their friendship and their coverage of the Cambodian Civil War and the Khmer Rouge takeover.
Uh-huh.
So the film was looking to cast several Cambodians.
Yeah.
Pat asks Haing, hey, can I take your picture and get your contact info for this film I'm working on? But Haing declined. He was like, sorry, the band is playing my jam right now and I gotta dance.
Yeah.
Which is true. Like, he really just wanted to go dance.
He's dancing. Don't interrupt me.
When he came off the dance floor, though, Pat was persistent. And he started getting a little angry. If you remember in part 1, he can be quick to anger by his own admission. He's hot-tempered. He was like, please leave me alone. She was like, chill. It's just a photo. All of his friends at the wedding reception had already done it. So finally he was like, ugh, okay, whatever. He gets his picture taken. Months go by. He doesn't hear anything. Meanwhile, he's just still working at the service center.
Yeah.
Then out of the blue, he gets a call from casting director Pat Golden.
Pat Golden.
Asking him to come in for an interview. He said, all right, I'll be there. But he didn't show up. Honestly, don't blame him. He just got to the U.S. in 1980, and I don't know how anyone who had lived through the Cambodian genocide would then be able to turn around so quickly afterwards and relive those experiences.
100%. Also, I want a t-shirt with Pat Golden's face on it that says, when Pat Golden calls, you answer.
You answer, bitch. She's a pretty phenomenal lady. She's a director and stuff now.
That's awesome. But I understand Hank's hesitation. Like,
absolutely.
And so from the time he got to the U.S. to this starting to happen, how long was that?
It's only like 2.5 years.
See, that's still super recent.
Yeah, that's not a long time.
It's really not.
Like many refugees, Haing was suffering from some serious PTSD. He had nightmares practically every night. He played Hoy's death in his mind over and over. The sound of water dripping from a faucet was such a trigger for him because it immediately took him back to when he had to endure that water torture.
Shit.
He didn't know who he could trust. And in a big city like LA, he was always hearing sirens and people in cars honking their horns. So there were a lot of triggers. Mm-hmm. His mental health definitely played a role in his decision not to show up for this interview. But Pat Golden wasn't going to let it go.
And she never would.
If you know anything about casting directors, you know if they have their eye on someone, they will go to great lengths to get that person in. So Pat called him and convinced him to come in for this interview. A week after that, he was called in for a second interview, and then a third. Each time they would give him a scenario and have him act out what he would say or do in that situation. There was no script for him to read from, so he's just improvising.
Wow.
But the scenarios all hit close to home, so he didn't have trouble putting himself in those situations. Roland Joffe, the director, would say things like, okay, imagine you have to convince your wife to leave with the Americans because the Khmer Rouge are going to kill everyone, but you have to stay in Cambodia. Like, these are not easy scenes.
I also, in this instance, I'm thinking like ethically on their part.
Oh, I'm right there with you.
Right? Like it just feels ick.
When they actually do start shooting, there was a very emotional scene and Haing was having a hard time because they had to do so many takes. And he went to Roland and he was like, I just don't think I can do this again. And Roland kind of ignored him and was like, let's go again.
See, that's a little messed up for me. Like, I get, making the movie, I get it, but also you're kind of capitalizing on someone else's trauma.
I don't know if I would put it that way, I mean, they do have the best of intentions in making this movie.
And of course they will. And that's fine. But still,
I just don't think they take into consideration the person's mental health. I don't think they're trying to capitalize on that. I just don't think they're realizing maybe doing this over and over and over and over again is not the best thing for them. Like maybe take a day in between, but in production, that doesn't exist. So even though he'd initially been against auditioning for the film, over time his outlook changed because he saw it as a way to help tell the story of his home country and to bring awareness of what was happening there.
Okay.
Because even though the Vietnamese had pushed out the Khmer Rouge, there's still fighting going on over there. And Khmer Rouge soldiers had left and dispersed throughout the world. There are also still hundreds of thousands of Cambodian refugees still living in those refugee camps at the Thai-Cambodian border at this time. So Haing thought, if I can play some part in helping people understand what is happening, then I can feel good about that.
Yeah.
After his 6th and final audition, he didn't hear anything. Months passed with no word. Meanwhile, he's still working at the Chinatown Service Center. He tried not to think about the movie because 7,000 Cambodians had applied for roles in the film. It was a hot topic among the Cambodian communities, both in Chinatown and in Long Beach. And so he's trying to put it out of his mind. But I think after like auditioning so many times, the more he was thinking about it, like, you know, he was kind of getting his hopes up, I think.
Yeah.
Finally, Haing got the call. Although according to his autobiography, they didn't tell him what role he'd be playing. They were just like, we'll be shooting the film in Thailand. Will that be a problem? Like they wanted to make sure he had the right documentation and stuff that he could go. He was like, no problem at all. He arranged for a guardian to care for his niece while he returned to the country he had just left 3 years earlier.
Oh my God.
It wasn't until the first rehearsal that he learned he'd be playing Dith Pran. Haing was like, oh damn, this is a huge role. To prepare the cast, director Roland Joffe had Haing and Sam Waterston, who was playing Sidney Schamberg, visit the Thai-Cambodian border, and Joffe had assigned Sam to write news articles about what he saw and heard, just like he was a real journalist. And since Haing spoke Khmer and pretty good Thai, he was Sam's interpreter, which was very much the relationship of Sidney Schamberg and Dith Pran.
Okay.
Not only did they visit the Cambodian refugees, but also Khmer Rouge soldiers living in the camps. Because remember from part 1, Khmer Rouge soldiers had gotten out and were now in these refugee camps receiving aid that really belonged to the Cambodians.
I hate that.
Sam Waterston interviewed them as Haing sat there trying to remain calm because I think inside his blood was boiling. I don't know how you would even... I guess when he was there during the genocide, like he kind of had to do the same thing. You're just constantly emotionless, trying to keep a poker face. Mm-hmm. So I guess he just went back to that because you can't get all up in their face, you know?
That would have been hard. I would have been like, motherfuckers.
I mean, yeah, because imagine if you're sitting right across from the people that killed your family.
Yeah.
And also what's estimated to be up to 3 million Cambodian citizens.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Fuck the Khmer Rouge.
This was, however, a great way for Haing and Sam to bond. And from there, the director sent the two of them, along with John Malkovich and Julian Sands, to northern Thailand.
Thailand.
Wow.
It's a new country.
It's where Thailand and
Ireland
decided to join forces.
Ireland.
Yeah.
Or that would be an amazing name for a tire shop.
Tireland. New merch.
New merch.
I'll start it again. And from there, the director sent the two of them, along with John Malkovich and Julian Sands, to northern Thailand and said, your only assignment is to get to know each other. So the four of them hung out, went sightseeing. Haing interpreted for all of them when they ordered food or how to get a taxi.
Yeah.
Haing said that Sam Waterston was the one who seemed most interested in truly getting to know him. Like, he asked the majority of the questions about Haing's life. And Haing said the two of them usually spoke in French because that was easier for Haing than English. And Sam Waterston is fluent in French. I had no idea.
Well, holy shit.
I love Sam Waterston. He's just he just seems like the best guy. Haing said Sam was really easy to talk to, hence why he felt so comfortable telling him about leaving that patient on the operating table to die when the rebels came into the hospital. I mentioned that in part 1. He kept that a secret for years and years, and Sam Waterston was the first person he told.
Wow.
Haing said Sam was very polite and intelligent, and the two of them became good friends. He went on to say, quote, "In a totally different way, I also became friends with John Malkovich, who was very naughty and funny. John was always telling dirty jokes. He got me to teach him to curse in Khmer. For me, it was the best of both worlds. I could behave like a gentleman with Sam Waterston or a rascal with John Malkovich."
Well.
The cast and crew were in Thailand for 4.5 months filming The Killing Fields, which was really stressful for Haing because the scenes they were shooting were so reminiscent, obviously, of what he'd actually been through. So that scene I was telling you about where they did several takes, it's where he has to say goodbye to the Americans, and he, as Dith Pran, is being forced by Khmer Rouge to go to the countryside where he's sure he's going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And Haing could not stop crying. They shot the scene those 6 times. After the 6th time, he goes to Roland Joffe. He's like, "I cannot do this anymore." And Roland's like, "One more." In between all of those takes, wardrobe had to keep running over to bring him boxes of tissues. On the 7th take, nailed it.
Great.
Haing actually tried to convince Joffe that the film should be more violent if he wanted it to be authentic. But Joffe refused, saying no one would go see it if it depicted events to the degree that they really occurred. It is a watered down version, I will say.
You've watched it?
Yeah, you can stream it. I suggest everyone watch it.
Okay.
Haing said his nightmares were worse than ever during his time working on the film. He lost a ton of weight. He missed his niece, obviously, but he did enjoy the cast and crew. Because that was another weird thing. He's like, we'd be in these scenes, these war scenes, and it's very traumatic, and I have PTSD. And then later that night, we're all in the hotel and we're partying and we're eating the most amazing food. He was like, it was such a weird transition.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. He was happy to reunite with the cast over the next few months when they had to do pickup shots for the film, like close-ups for a particular scene or audio dubbing. Once the film came out at the end of 1984, Haing Ngor became an overnight celebrity.
Wow.
Suddenly, limousines were sent to pick him up from his apartment to take him to screenings. The media really hyped him up because what a headline, right?
Yeah.
Cambodian refugee stars in new film opposite Sam Waterston. And Sam was already a well-established actor. John Malkovich, he was still pretty new to the scene at the time. But Sam Waterston was established. So Haing's doing interviews. He's getting nominated for awards. Talk about a glow up.
That's fabulous.
Leading up to the Oscars, he won multiple awards, including the Golden Globe for Best Performance by an Actor in a Supporting Role and 2 BAFTA awards, Best Actor and Most Outstanding Newcomer to Film.
Hey, BAFTAs.
The Killing Fields was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Haing for Best Supporting Actor. News crews were showing up at his work and at his apartment to interview him. They followed him around. They even followed him when he went to go pick up his tux for the Oscars.
That's hysterical. And he's just going right on back to his life. And
yeah, he's like, I don't know why they wanted to see me get my tux. The night of the ceremony, limousines and news crews were waiting outside his apartment, and the whole neighborhood came out to see the fanfare. He brought his niece to the award ceremony. At this point, I just want to say she had changed her name to Sophia because the kids at her school claimed they couldn't pronounce Nim. And she, being so young as she was when she came to the U.S., didn't have as difficult a time becoming quote-unquote Americanized as a lot of the older Cambodians did. So she's now going by Sophia.
Okay.
Unfortunately, traffic getting to the Oscars was bumper to bumper. And by the time they got there, the show had already started. He ran in just a couple of minutes before his category was announced. He didn't even get there in time to get to his actual seat. So when they announced the categories, you know how they put the camera on each person? They couldn't find him because he wasn't in his actual seat. So there's nothing there. And then they throw up a picture of him. John Malkovich was also up for supporting actor, but not for The Killing Fields, for a different movie. But he was in some good, Pat Morita for Karate Kid. He had some competition.
Whoa.
Actress Linda Hunt presented his category.
The winner is Haing S. Ngor in The Killing Fields.
This unbelievable. But so is my entire life. I wish to thank all members of Motion Picture Academy for this great honor. I thank David Putnam, Ron Joffé for giving me this chance to act for the first time in the killing fields. And I share this award to my friend Sam Waterston, Dick Brown, Sri Schumberg, and also Pat Gordon, the casting lady who found me for this role. And I thank Warner Brother for helping me tell my story to the world, let the world know what happened in my country. And I thank God, Buddha, that tonight I'm even here. Thank you, man. Thank you.
Yeah, I love him. He's like, and casting lady.
Casting lady, Pat Golden.
That Black American woman at that Cambodian wedding. When he got back to his seat, his actual seat that he was supposed to be in, which happened to be right behind John Malkovich, John turned to him with this sly grin on his face, and speaking in Khmer, which Haing had taught him, John said, "Kiss my ass, it's mine." I love that story.
Oh, John
so much.
Malkovich.
Winning the Oscar opened a lot of doors for Haing, and he went on to act in several more films and TV shows, including Miami Vice, China Beach, Highway to Heaven, The Commish, on and on and on. But the award also enabled him to broaden his work with refugees. He left his job at the service center a few months later to work with other humanitarian organizations that helped Cambodian refugees. He traveled all over the world, giving speeches, meeting with various members of government. He visited the Thai-Cambodian border often and helped start a medical training center there.
Amazing.
He and Dith Pran became close friends and worked hard to persuade the courts to bring the leaders of the Khmer Rouge before an international tribunal so they could be held accountable for their war crimes.
Yes, get those bitches out in front of a jury. Did that happen, like, actually?
Eventually.
Okay.
The Khmer Rouge Tribunal began in 2006, but unfortunately, Haing Ngor wouldn't live to see it. On the evening of February 25th, 1996, just before 8:45 p.m., Haing Ngor was returning home after spending the evening with his cousin Tommy in Long Beach. His apartment building, the same apartment building he lived in since he came to the United States in 1980, sat at the top of a hill near Dodger Stadium, overlooking downtown LA. The building's carport was located on the back side of the building in the alley. Haing pulled into his parking space, and just as he was exiting his car, a gunman approached. Haing was hit by 2 bullets, one in the right hip that went through his right thigh, and another that went through his chest.
Ooh.
This was a fatal shot.
Yeah.
Haing was 55 years old.
God damn.
Based on the trajectory of the bullets, it appears he was shot while still sitting in the driver's seat, or at least partially sitting. He hadn't gotten out of the car yet. And the gunman approached on the driver's side because both bullets had a downward trajectory and entered front to back and left to right. The bullet to Haing's chest went through his left lung, then tore through his pericardium, which is that sac that surrounds the heart. His aorta and pulmonary artery were almost completely severed. The bullet then went through his right lung. What's wild is that despite this, there was no injury to the heart itself, which is crazy to think about given the path of the bullet.
Yeah.
If you wanted to find a silver lining, it would be that this was a pretty quick death. Even if an ambulance had been there at the scene, he likely would have been dead before they could even treat him. The 911 call came in around 8:45 p.m. by an anonymous caller, stating that there was a body in the carport in the alley. Officer Lewis Wiggins responded to the scene, and when he found Haing Ngor, he knew exactly who he was. Haing was a celebrity. He was considered a hero among Cambodians. That evening, the alley was soon swarming with police and news crews, and word traveled quickly through the neighborhood. Neighbors all started calling each other, like trying to find out what happened. Hey, did you hear that? What's going on? A friend and neighbor of Haing's called Haing to see if he knew anything. But of course, he did not pick up. No one actually saw the shooting occur. There are no eyewitnesses to the crime. But a couple of neighbors did tell officers that they heard what sounded like gunshots and then heard a car speed away up the alley going north. This was a high-profile case for the LAPD, and they were feeling a lot of pressure not only by the community but also the media to solve the case quickly. Tommy, Haing's cousin, who he just spent the entire day with in Long Beach, received a call from another cousin telling him that Haing had been killed. He was like, no, that can't be. Like, he just left my place a few minutes ago. So he drove to Haing's apartment in LA to see for himself. Officers wouldn't let him up to the carport, but one of them said, don't worry, all his belongings are still there. Which is just a weird thing to say because also, like, how would they even know that?
What?
But in the backseat of Haing's car was his sport coat, and inside one of the pockets of the coat was an envelope with $2,900 in cash inside.
Okay.
In Haing's wallet, there was close to $1,000 in cash.
Okay.
So detectives ruled out robbery as a motive. He's got close to $4,000 on him. After searching Haing's apartment and talking with Tommy, detectives failed to turn up any clues as to what led to Haing's murder. Several people in the community believed this to be a political hit by the Khmer Rouge.
I was thinking that, like, right as you said that, I was like, because we know that some of these Khmer Rouge are also getting into the U.S.
Exactly.
Regardless of what they've done. I could see how they would take a hit out on him.
And even though they had escaped Cambodia and resettled in the U.S., many refugees still lived in fear that one day the Khmer Rouge would find them and kill them. So, yeah, it's completely understandable why they would think that.
Was that a thing that happened ever? Did you come across any? And, you know, obviously maybe not, but, like, you have both sides here.
I never came across any of that in the research.
Okay.
I haven't found any evidence that this was something that
happened
occurred.
Regularly. Okay.
At this point in time, there still had not been a tribunal holding anyone in the Khmer Rouge accountable for their part in the Cambodian genocide, and Haing Ngor had been very vocal over the years, meeting with heads of government, lecturing at conferences, not to mention his role in the film The Killing Fields, and his autobiography, which goes into detail about the atrocities committed by the Khmer Rouge. Haing's friends and family used to tell him, like, be careful, stop talking so much because you're going to get yourself killed. The FBI looked into the political hit theory, but didn't find any evidence to support it. Just a day or two into the investigation, detectives spoke with Sophia, Haing's niece.
Yeah.
And she just happened to ask Detective John Garcia, one of the lead investigators, if they found her uncle's Rolex and his necklace with the gold locket. The locket he had made in Bangkok with Hoy's picture. Sophia said he always wore that locket and never took it off. They had not found these items on Haing or anywhere near the crime scene, which causes detectives to turn to the theory that this was in fact a robbery gone wrong. Officers spoke with Haing's cousin Tommy again, the one Haing spent his last day with, to confirm that Haing was wearing these items. Tommy was able to confirm that Haing was wearing the Rolex that day, but couldn't confirm the locket. When Haing wore the locket, it was underneath his clothes, so you wouldn't know it was there if he was wearing it. But detectives assumed, well, if he was wearing the Rolex, he must have been wearing the locket. And based on this assumption, because that's all it is, it's just an assumption, investigators developed a theory that someone saw Haing drive up in the alley in his gold Mercedes, because he did have an affinity for Mercedes. They approached as he parked his car and held him at gunpoint. They demanded his Rolex, which he gave willingly, then demanded his gold locket. But when Haing refused to part with that locket, they shot him and stole the locket anyway. The Rolex, the locket, and the gun were never recovered.
Damn.
When investigators tried talking with people in the neighborhood, many of whom are Cambodian, they had a difficult time communicating. One, because of the language barrier, and two, because there was a lot of distrust in law enforcement among the refugees based on their experiences in Cambodia. So the lead investigators, Detectives John Garcia and Bert Looper, enlisted Ed Yee. Ed Yee had immigrated from Hong Kong when he was about 4 years old, and he grew up in Chinatown, so he knows this area well.
Mm-hmm.
He became a police officer, but in 1996, the year of Haing's murder, Yee had only graduated from the police academy a couple of years prior, so he's still pretty new. He started out in LAPD's Crash Unit, which was basically their anti-gang unit.
Oh, I see.
Crash stands for Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums.
I don't love that
No.
name. Is that still a thing?
No, it's not still a thing.
Good.
And Ed Yee's job was to drive around looking for people who were suspected of being gang members. He would photograph them, and the photos were compiled into what were known as gang books. And they would include any details available on the suspected gang member. One of the Asian gangs in Chinatown was the OLB, which stands for Oriental Lazy Boys. Supposedly it's a name they gave themselves. The OLB is made up mostly of Cambodians and began in the 1980s when young refugees who were new to the U.S. faced harassment and discrimination. They formed as a means of protection. Because also keep in mind, a lot of the kids that came over as refugees, their parents had been killed.
Yeah.
So they find other refugee kids to form sort of a family with. Ed Yee became pretty familiar with several members from the OLB. If he didn't know them personally, he at least knew who they were. So when Detective Bert Looper asked Ed Yee, a fairly new officer who had never worked a high-profile case and did not work in the robbery homicide division, who he thought committed this crime, Yee said, quote, "Well, if I had to guess, it was the OLB." Yee had not seen the case file, had not reviewed any evidence, and had not conducted a single interview at this point. But he names the OLB, and that's not all. He named 3 specific guys he said probably did it.
This is not an investigation. This is making guesses based on nothing.
Based on racial profiling, based on a lot of misconduct within the LAPD.
And it just seems like they don't give a shit. It's kind of like, well, why don't we ask the one Asian guy if he knows who did it?
Yeah.
And he's like, probably this gang, probably these 3 people. And they're like,
guys?
oh, sure, great, perfect.
Yeah. So get ready.
Sure.
Those 3 guys were Jason Chan, Indra Lim, and Tok Sun Tan, all between 18 and 19 years old. Yee admitted he'd never had a single encounter with any of those guys, but knew who they were. He told the podcast Strangeland, I think I mentioned Strangeland in the first one, that the reason he thought it was those 3 was because Indra Lim lived in the neighborhood and would smoke crack in the alley with the other 2. So basically he's just like, yeah, he lives around there and he has friends. They sometimes do things they shouldn't do, so obviously they committed murder. When the Strangeland podcast pressed him on this, asking, was there any other reason you suspected these boys other than the fact that the OLB had a presence in the neighborhood? He never responded. Mm-hmm. So the LAPD runs with the idea that Jason Chan, Indra Lim, and Tok Sun Tan robbed Haing to get money for drugs. And when Haing wouldn't give up the locket, one of them shot him. So that's their theory. And during this time in the 90s, the LAPD had incentive to going after gang members because the federal government provided funding to departments that put gang members behind bars. And that funding translated to bigger paychecks to police officers. This led to a lot of corruption within police departments, obviously, including planting evidence, perjury, racial profiling, cover-ups. The Crash motto was, "We intimidate those who intimidate others." You might have heard of the Rampart scandal.
Yeah.
It involved Crash officers in LAPD's Rampart division. In the late 90s, more than 70 cops were implicated in perjury and falsifying evidence. It led to more than 100 criminal convictions being overturned. The TV show The Shield, the movies Crash and Training Day, the game Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas, these were all inspired by the Crash program and the Rampart scandal.
Wow.
The Shield was almost called Rampart.
Wow.
But they were like, oh, we don't want to.
Just in case.
So Officer Ed Yee is coming from the Crash department, not the Rampart division, but that's the experience he's bringing to this investigation. I'll go ahead and say no one in this investigation was ever accused of the things that the Crash Rampart officers were accused of.
Okay.
But just know that he is a Crash officer with that experience as his background.
We don't trust him.
Well, listen to the story and decide for yourself. After naming these 3 teenagers as the perpetrators responsible based on no evidence whatsoever, the lead detectives instructed Ed Yee to, quote, go out and do whatever you have to do to solve this case, bring us results, and don't kill anybody. So Ed Yee and his team went around the neighborhood talking to potential witnesses. Multiple people that lived near Haing, even people in his own building, claimed they heard what sounded like 3 gunshots, then within seconds, a car speeding away up the alley going north. So we need to talk about the alley where the carport was located. For one, it's pretty long. From the end of the alley by the street up to where Haing's carport is located is 712 feet, so close to the length of 2 football fields. And it's on an incline, so it goes uphill. After Haing's carport, the alley continues up a steep incline before hitting street level. The alley is crucial to this case. So the people around Haing's building heard what they believed to be gunshots and almost immediately hear the tires squeal up the steep incline headed north. One person actually saw this car, and that was 9-year-old David Nguyen. On the evening of the murder, David was in his home, which was located directly across the alley from Haing's carport. He was doing his homework when he heard what he thought were firecrackers, so he ran to his window. When he looked outside, he saw a small gray and black car speed up the steep hill.
Okay.
A couple that lived in Haing's building said they heard 3 gunshots and a car immediately peel out. Yee brought in the 3 guys he had named that he think committed the crime. And through the years, their stories have always remained the same. And, they were interviewed separately, and their stories all match up.
Oh, wow.
They were hanging out together that night.
Mm-hmm.
They were hanging at Indra's house. Indra lived 1 street over from Haing with the alley in between them.
Okay.
They went to an apartment building next door to Indra's building to do drugs, then came back to Indra's house. The 3 of them were hanging out in the driveway in front of his building, so street side, not alley side.
Street side. Okay.
When Indra's mom received a phone call from a neighbor saying someone had been shot and there was a big police presence in the area, in the alley.
Yeah.
The boys had seen a couple of police cars drive by but hadn't thought much of it. And if they heard the gunshots, they wouldn't have known because it was Chinese New Year. Firecrackers had been going off all day and night.
Yeah.
So they weren't really aware that anything was happening. But after getting that call, Indra's mom ran outside and was like, boys, guys, you got to go home. Indra, get in here right now. Talk, Jason, you 2 need to go home.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. Indra went inside, and Talk and Jason walked south and saw their friend Timmy, who lived in a building close to the street at the bottom of the alley. Timmy was in his car, so they waved him down and asked him for a ride. But according to Talk, who spoke with the Strangeland podcast, Ed Yee wasn't interested in his account of what happened. Yee kept Talk in the interrogation room for 9 hours.
No.
With no food, no water, wouldn't let him go to the restroom, and would not let him leave. He kept demanding that Talk admit to the murder, but Talk didn't. Talk even agreed to a lie detector test, which he passed with flying colors. Yee also brought in Timmy, the friend that gave the guys a ride, as well as Varick, who had been hanging out with Timmy that evening. Mm-hmm. If you read about this case in other places, you'll hear a lot more names involved. I'm just trying to keep it to the central people because there's a lot of people that are brought in as witnesses, and I'm just trying to keep it like as simple and clear as I can.
Yeah.
So Timmy and Varick become the prosecution's star witnesses. But there are so many problems with their statements. They were each interviewed multiple times, like 6 or 7 times. And each time, more details kept getting added to their stories, details that confirmed what the prosecution said happened.
Yeah.
For example, originally Timmy says he was parked in the alley. He was parked with his car facing up the alley, like facing north. He got in his car to drive somewhere, but because of the police presence at the top of the hill, he had to do a U-turn, go south down the alley where he turned right and saw Jason and Talk walking towards him. The interrogating officer asked him repeatedly, how many people did you see running down the alley? He tells them over and over, I didn't see anyone running down the alley. I only saw people once I turned right onto the street. Mm-hmm. Later, the officer asks, and you're sure it was them, Cloudy and Solo, running down the hill? Cloudy and Solo are 2 of the guys' gang names. Timmy says, yes, I guess they came downward, yes. So the officer just straight up changed what Timmy had said, just slightly, rewording it so it fit his theory. Talk had said he saw them walking towards him. Later, the officer says, okay, so you're sure it was them running down the hill? So it's small little changes like that.
He was like, I didn't see anybody running.
In Varick's questioning, a Khmer interpreter was used because Varick spoke Khmer. But it's important to note that the interpreter was a police officer. And despite supposedly interpreting, there are several points during the interview transcript that just say untranslatable. So we have no idea what was being said there.
What the fuck? If you're a translator, do your job.
Yeah, I don't know what that's about. It's also important to know that Varick was one of many Cambodians forced to work the fields and endure torture under the Khmer Rouge regime. So he had a lot of PTSD from that. And according to his brother, Varick was terrified of law enforcement. So when Yi questions him, it's basically Yi planting these scenarios and Varick just responding with yes or right. Similar to Timmy's questioning, Yi would add or change little details in Varick's statement. Like Varick originally said he didn't know the guys that approached Timmy's car. They were towards the south end of the alley and approached the car slowly. But in a later interview, Yi says to him, when we first brought you in, you told us that you saw them more southbound down an alley, which you were incorrect. You weren't sure. Varick says, right. Yi says, you saw them right behind the rear of the vehicle, meaning Haing Ngor's vehicle. Mm-hmm. Am I correct? Varick says, right. Remember, Timmy's house, where Varick was with Timmy, is at the bottom of the alley, 2 football fields away from Haing's carport.
Right.
Yi also implies it's 3 guys Varick saw, not just 2, and asks him who was closest to Haing's car. Varick says, I cannot see. Yi says, take a guess. Literally, just guess. Because he's trying to figure out who the trigger man is. And he's thinking, Yi is thinking, okay, so whoever was closest to the car, that must be the trigger man. So that's why he's just trying to get Varick to give a name. Timmy and Varick's stories directly contradicted each other. Not only that, their initial interviews were never recorded by police. And the ones that were only partially recorded because detectives kept switching the recording on and off. The case went to trial in February of 1998 with Judge J.D. Smith presiding. J.D. Smith, who happens to be a former LAPD cop.
What is happening here, Kate?
It's wild.
This is it's disgusting.
It's dirty.
It's dirty.
It's really dirty.
Yeah.
Judge Smith decided to have just one trial rather than 3 separate trials, saying it would save taxpayers money and would prevent the same witnesses from having to testify in 3 separate trials. But since each defendant is entitled to their own jury, this meant there were 3 juries in the courtroom plus alternates. 48 jurors in all. They had to set up extra chairs. There were jurors seated right behind the attorneys. And whenever there was something pertaining to one defendant and not the other 2, those other 2 juries had to be led out of the courtroom.
Confusing as fuck.
Yeah, it was
confusing
madness.
as fuck. Is that even legal?
Well, it was illegal, but unprecedented, and I don't think it's ever happened again.
Yeah, because why the fuck would you do that?
Yeah, it was awful. Prosecutor Craig Hum set out to paint the defendants as drug-addicted gang members who were a menace to society. And he preyed on the jurors' emotions with the story about that fucking locket, how it was the only picture Haing had of his deceased wife who died in his arms, which is why he wouldn't give it up and it cost him his life. Not only was there zero evidence that he was even wearing the locket at the time of his murder, but what Craig Hum said about it being the only picture he had of her simply wasn't true. He had that same picture enlarged and hanging in his apartment, which detectives would have known because they searched his place. Mm-hmm. Whoever did this didn't steal his Mercedes, didn't go through his pockets where they would have found close to $4,000, so it just doesn't feel like robbery is the motive. Furthermore, investigators said the 3 defendants ran down the hill of the alley after shooting Haing, got into Timmy's car, then sped back up the hill. Why would they go back up past the crime scene?
That makes no sense.
Talk told the Strangeland podcast. Guys, listen to that Strangeland podcast. It's season 3, The Killing Fields of LA. They go deep, like far more than I'm going into. It's a 12-part series. It's so good. Talk told the Strangeland podcast that everyone in that neighborhood knew him and Jason and Indra. They all grew up there. So if they had done something and neighbors looked out their windows and saw them, they'd know it was them. He said, quote, "If you really think about it, why would you want to commit a crime where you live all your life?"
Right.
Prior to these murder charges, the only things the guys had been charged with was petty theft, with the exception of Talk, who did have a battery charge.
Okay.
If they had run from the carport down the length of 2 football fields, gotten into a car, then drove back up the carport, or drove back up the alley, it would have taken a lot longer than the mere couple of seconds multiple neighbors claimed there were between the gunshots and the tire squealing. And Timmy had even stated that the reason he had to make a U-turn was because there was already a large police presence at the top of the hill.
Right.
The prosecution's star witnesses, Timmy and Varick, both recanted on the stand, claiming that it was investigators who had coerced their statements. Prosecutor Craig Hum turned this around by saying it wasn't unusual in gang-related cases for witnesses to recant because they're worried about retaliation from the gang. But that's not what they're doing.
No.
They're not saying, I said this, but I take it back. They're saying, I said this because that's what the investigators made it seem like I said, even though it contradicted my initial statement.
Yeah.
The jury was rightfully confused by the prosecutor's timeline because all these neighbors are saying the car peeled out immediately after the gunshots. And little 9-year-old David Nguyen said he looked out his window immediately after hearing the shots and saw a gray and black car speed up the hill. For the guys to have reached Timmy's car, which was white, they'd have to be the Flash. Like, you can't run down 2 football field lengths, get in a car, and zoom back up in 2 seconds.
Let's test it.
Strangeland actually did.
Oh, shit.
And it took, running as fast as possible, I think it took 41 or 42 seconds to get from the carport down to the bottom of the alley. Mm-hmm. Then like another 10 to 15 to get back up to speed up the top of that incline. The juries requested to see the alley for themselves, not only to tell if the timing of running down the hill and speeding away was even possible, but also to find out just how much a person at the bottom of the alley could see up by Haing's carport. Because the prosecution, based on the detective's interrogation, is saying Varick saw the 3 behind Haing's car, but the judge denied the jury's request. So they never got to see the alley. All 3 defendants were found guilty. Indra Lim was sentenced to 26 years to life. Thaksin Tan was sentenced to 56 years to life because he had that battery charge, so he got a longer sentence. And Jason Chan, who by no physical evidence whatsoever was labeled as the trigger man, received a life sentence without parole. Tak said of the investigators, quote, and this is to the Strangeland podcast that he's saying this to, they wasn't doing their job and they had to solve the case so that they can look good. And they just took the easy way out and just grabbed 3 bad kids from the neighborhood and just accused them for something they didn't do. These guys, they're their own little gangs, like they use their power, their authority, their badge to do what they want, take shortcuts and to get away with everything. Who's the bad guy? You tell me.
Ooh. I like that quote. Legal gangs.
And the people that helped put these 3 young guys behind bars were heavily rewarded. Yi was told he could have any position within the department he wanted, and Craig Hum is now the head deputy district attorney of major crimes in Los Angeles. So it was case closed, but that doesn't necessarily mean this case was solved. In 2009, during the Khmer Rouge tribunal, when some of these war criminals were finally put on trial, one of the Khmer Rouge prison leaders, known as Comrade Doik, stated that Pol Pot, who I mentioned in part 1, he was the top dog in the Khmer Rouge regime. Mm-hmm. He said Pol Pot had ordered the killing of Haing Ngor because he had appeared in the killing fields. Many Cambodians agree and have long believed Haing Ngor's death was politically motivated. And Comrade Doik wasn't being questioned about Haing. He wasn't prompted. Like, he just brings this up out of nowhere. So it is interesting. But a lot of people have tossed that theory aside. Investigative journalist Mary Patricia Noonan, thinks if the Khmer Rouge had wanted to kill Haing Ngor, why wait 13 years after the movie came out? And why not do it on Cambodian soil? Haing traveled back there all the time.
Yeah.
So why hire a hit halfway across the world? There's no real evidence stating the Khmer Rouge was involved in Haing's murder, but many refugees, including his cousin Tommy, say that the regime can wait and wait until they want to attack and they can find you anywhere. Mm-hmm. And it's true, like we were saying earlier, that some Khmer Rouge got into the U.S., including that one cousin of Haing's, the son of Haing's Aunt Kim. She was the one who ratted him out to soldiers.
She was the bitchy one.
Yeah. Haing was very outspoken about what the Khmer Rouge had done and was capable of, and he did travel all over the world. And it wasn't difficult to find him because his neighborhood had been so highly publicized when he won the Oscar. Like, they were showing him at his work. They were showing him at his home. So that's a theory that Pol Pot hired the hit. There's also a theory that King Sihanouk, who we talked about in part 1, or Sihanouk, was angry with Haing over what he'd written about him in his autobiography, because Haing was not kind to Sihanouk in the autobiography and continued to speak out against him for years. And some believe King Sihanouk ordered Haing's murder. But again, there's no concrete evidence it was Pol Pot or Sihanouk, just like there's no evidence that the 3 teens from the OLB were involved. Aside from political reasons for Haing's murder, there are personal reasons that some say could have led to his death that investigators simply did not look into. Mm-hmm. According to Roger Warner, who helped Haing write his autobiography, A Cambodian Odyssey, Haing was a complicated guy. Haing himself admits to being quick to anger, hot-tempered, and Roger witnessed him get into confrontations with other Cambodians and got the sense that Haing could be off-putting to some.
Okay.
Roger also talked about Haing having many girlfriends and speculated that maybe he had stopped wearing the locket for this reason. It's important to note that detectives never reached out to Roger during their investigation. Haing didn't leave behind a will, so his niece Sophia was appointed administrator of his estate. But suddenly, all these people start coming out of the woodwork.
Mm-hmm. Money.
Another niece, stating she was the daughter of Haing's sister, came forward. But Sophia and Haing's 2 surviving brothers all testified that Haing didn't have any sisters. But he writes in his book about having sisters. So, what?
Wasn't it like a family of 8 kids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, all records were destroyed by the Khmer Rouge, so there's nothing to really fact check this.
Right.
Then a woman from France came forward saying she was Haing's wife, which is like, okay, well, no, you're not. But she had the marriage license to prove it.
What? Was it real?
In 1981, they married in Las Vegas shortly after meeting, but it didn't last because, according to her, he was cheating on her with other women. What? But no one ended up with any money from his U.S. assets because that money went entirely to lawyers. He was involved in several business deals, but it's difficult to find a paper trail because apparently it was all under the table stuff, which is why he often had envelopes containing large sums of cash. Haing also owned a lumber mill in Cambodia, and when he died, that asset went to his younger brother, a high-ranking corrupt official in the Cambodian government who profited off the mill when he sold it to some people who had ties to organized crime. So was that a motive for killing Haing? According to the Innocence Project, which has been working on Jason Chan's case, they state that one of Haing's business deals involved the sale of a banking license. However, a few weeks after the sale, the license ended up being worthless. The buyer allegedly demanded their money back, claiming they'd kill Haing if he didn't pay. Haing was only able to return half the money, and this was never investigated.
I mean, all of this is sounding like probably, more probable than what they came up with.
Yeah. It's kind of like he was living this secretive double life. And had they looked into it, it probably could have shed some light on what happened to him and why. But they were so hell-bent on painting him as this hero, this saintly humanitarian, which, I mean, he was that too. But
sure, but there's multiple facets to everybody, right?
Exactly. And they just didn't look at all the avenues. Toxin Tan was released in 2020 thanks to a new law that increased the burden of proof for past felony convictions. A judge ruled the evidence against him did not meet that burden.
Good.
However, upon release, he was immediately taken into ICE custody. He was a Cambodian refugee. He had lived under the Khmer Rouge, and when he was little, he escaped with his mom through the mountains and the jungle into Thailand and eventually made it to the U.S. However, his refugee status was revoked because of the murder conviction. So ICE was trying to deport him back to Cambodia. Because Haing Nor's younger brother was a high-ranking official there, Tok's lawyer argued that he faced a real threat of being killed if he were to be sent back. A judge ruled in his favor.
Good.
So he was released in 2024, though he does have to wear an ICE ankle monitor.
God damn.
I highly encourage you to listen to Strangeland because you get to hear him talk. I believe the episode he speaks the most in is called The Bad Guy. Mm-hmm. It will break your heart because, I mean, he was a teenager when, he was taken into custody. And he just talks about how he had a 4-year-old sister when he went behind bars who doesn't know him. So he's trying to repair that relationship. He got out. He was like, I don't know how to use a phone. Like these cell phones, I didn't know what any of that was.
Right.
It's heartbreaking because all the evidence points to it's not them, there's nothing to say that it's them. And just to know that he lost a lifetime.
Yeah.
Indra Lim was also paroled, and based on the podcast Who Killed Haing Nor by investigative journalist Mary Patricia Noonan, who I mentioned earlier, Jason Chan was also paroled. That would have happened either last year or this year, but the podcast states he was taken into custody by ICE and his case is still pending. I could not corroborate this. I couldn't find any articles about it. I reached out to Maylee Tao, one of the hosts for Strangeland, to see if she had any updates on his case. Unfortunately, she did not respond to me. Sad face. But both the people behind Strangeland and Mary Patricia Noonan contacted the LAPD requesting transcripts of Jason, Indra, and Tok's interrogations. They were denied. Mary Patricia Noonan, as recently as June 26 of this year, contacted the LAPD stating these records were submitted into trial and therefore in the public domain, but the LAPD hasn't responded to her latest request as far as I can tell. They're just withholding this. They don't want it to get out.
Well, they know they fucked it up.
At this point, it's impossible to say who killed Haing Nor.
Yeah.
But I feel with 100% certainty it was not Jason Chan, Indra Lim, or Toxin Tan.
No, it doesn't sound like it.
And I do hope their convictions are overturned.
Me too.
To end this on something positive.
Okay.
Sophia, Haing's niece, went on to marry and have a daughter named Brooke. Brooke was a competitive figure skater as well as an actor and singer. But when she got a little older, she began pursuing medicine, earning her bachelor's degree in neuroscience.
Yay!
She'll be heading into her 3rd year as a med student. And also last summer, she went on a mission trip to Cambodia with her school where she and her fellow students opened up a free clinic and provided care to around 500 patients. She said, quote, "My mom says she wishes my uncle was here because we have such parallel lives. I feel grateful every day to continue doing what he wanted in his life." So his legacy lives on.
Beautiful.
But how wild is that?
But what the fuck?
Yeah. Damn. The LAPD in the 90s.
They were a street gang. Like, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
They were going around using their power. What a bunch of bullshit to just decide the outcome of a case and then try to prove it.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, that is so against anything.
Confirmation bias out the ass. The fact that Ed Yee even says that they tell him, like, okay, well, just do whatever you have to do. Just bring us results. That's all they cared about. They just wanted to solve the case because it was so high profile.
Well,
and
and
there
they
was so
get
much pressure.
money for that, right?
Of course.
Let's stop using that as rewards for people because they will do anything to get it, regardless of who it hurts.
But I'm glad that the guys are out. From what I can tell, Jason Chan is out, but is still in custody with ICE. So I don't know what's happening with his case. Again, he was the one who they said was the trigger man.
And when did their prison sentences start?
98. I mean, they were taken into custody in 96.
Yeah.
The trial was in 98. And so here's hoping that eventually justice is served, not just for the guys who were wrongly accused,
But for Haing.
Because
what the hell happened there? Something crazy happened. There's another big story there.
I don't know if the LAPD will ever open it back up and actually do a real investigation.
With their track record, it doesn't sound like that'll happen.
But I do hope that those convictions are overturned for the three guys.
Same.
Let us know your thoughts in the comments on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Spotify at
Horrorwood Podcast.
Or you can send us an email at
horrorwoodpodcast@gmail.com.
And if you're feeling generous, you can pop on over to Patreon at
patreon.com/horrorwoodpodcast.
Thank you for listening. I know that this was a lot. There's a lot of names. It's a lot of political stuff. But if you listen this far, thank you so much.
You did it.
You
did it. You made it to the end, girl.
Go you.
Good for you. You celebrate you. Go do something special for yourself.
And next week we'll be back with something a little bit more fun-ish, a little lighter, maybe a field trip. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bar?
Bar?
I think you want to go to the bar.
Hey.